Sup, guys? It's Toad back with you yet again, as usual. This is Better Off Dead Wednesday, January 29th. I still have no voice. I'm coming to you in the middle of the day here, but I think all the lines that I got, or haven't played yet, but they're all pretty much the same as they were this morning for today. Maybe slight differences between them, but whatever. We'll get into it. I can't restrain myself. I got a lot of plays today. I got 7 college basketball plays on this Wednesday card, 1 NBA play, skipping NHL. My Bruins suck. They lost 7-2 yesterday. I did not have a play on that game, but I don't suck. I went 5-0 yesterday, baby. Just hot for the last couple of weeks. Smoking hot. 5-0. Doesn't get better than that, baby. We had the outright win on Kentucky. Louisville with the win and cover there. We had non-win covers from the Atlanta Hawks and UCF. UCF was winning that game late, man. I think the refs kind of screwed them over. Could have had the money line cash on that one too, but they did cover pretty easily. The huge number against Kansas. And then, Atlanta Hawks. They were the one that was closest to not covering, I guess, or were closest to not covering, as they kind of blew the game. They were in the game for a while, then they fell behind by I think about 10, but then they got back into it and remained that way and wound up covering that one, not winning. And then I did get the outright win on the Portland Trail Blazers in the late game as well. So a couple of outright money line wins. Good day for me, man. Excellent day for me. I don't expect it to happen again, but let's keep it going. Let's at least have a winning day today, man. Hopefully my gauge on these games is going to be right here. The Kentucky-Tennessee game, by the way, was a fun game to watch, at least yesterday. I watched some of the end of it. Getting a little frustrating with the refs kind of giving Tennessee some of the calls there near the end. I'm not a Kentucky fan, but when I have money on them, I want that money line outright cash, baby. All right, let's talk about college basketball today. We have a huge college basketball card going on today, man. Samford and Furman is going to be a pretty good game. I'll just point that out. Samford is a 1-point favorite on the road, 56% of tickets, 88% of the cash. This is a battle between two of the better teams in the SoCon recently, although I think Furman may be a little bit down from where they were the last couple of years. Samford, I think, is still the best team in that conference, probably. So that is why they're laying 1 on the road there, and that is probably the way that I would look, all things considered. When you get a game like this where both teams are going to show up, more often than not, you kind of want to lean to the better team. Radford and UNC Asheville in the Big South is probably going to be an interesting one as well. 2 of the better teams in the Big South going at it. We do have some pretty good games tonight, man. Asheville is down from a 3 even money down to 2.5, so the money looks like it's come in a little bit on the Radford side, and the odds makers are not giving Asheville home court advantage here, so the odds makers are actually telling you they think Radford is the slightly better team there this year, so that one's going to be interesting as well. We'll see what happens with that game. Again, it's a game where I expect both teams to show up. We have Old Dominion and App State as one of the few matchups that I see today that's a revenge matchup of an extreme degree, where Old Dominion is playing App State for the second time, and they lost not that long ago at home by almost 20 points, only scoring 43 points at home against App State. So App State embarrassed them on their own floor. And now Old Dominion coming off a game where they finally got a win over a bad Coastal Carolina team, but still, at least that'll break that losing momentum for them. Old Dominion, I think they're going to show up in this one, and they at least have had some decent performances. They actually won on the road at South Alabama, who's one of the best teams in the conference. So it's not like Old Dominion can't compete when they actually show up for a game, and that might be the case here. App State, not coming off anything great, really. They beat UL Monroe. So they're not really necessarily in that bad of a spot, and they're actually playing at home for the first time in a long time, having 4 straight road games. They've actually been pretty good at home, so I'm not going to try to fade App State here, but that is the way that I would lean, and it is down from 12.5 to 11. App State, I think, was probably about 3.5, 4.5 when they played at Old Dominion, so this line, I think, is a little bit high and kind of maybe recency bias. I do think Old Dominion is going to be angry about how that first matchup panned out on their own floor, and they're going to want to try to repay the favor. So I do lean to taking the points with Old Dominion in that one, but not a play for me. What is a play for me, we're getting to the 7 p.m. games now. I'm going to play LSU plus the points here, man. I know it kind of looks dangerous to do it. LSU is not a very good team. I mean, typically they're not very good defensively. They're playing the number one team in the country here, Auburn, but I think the spot is right to grab the points with LSU here. The line's down from 13 to 12. I think there are still 12.5s out there. Auburn's going to be getting the public action, 62% of tickets and the cash, but we know what Auburn's coming off of, man. They're coming off a game where they beat Tennessee, and Johnny Broome came back in that game. There he is there. So he will be back. So Auburn does have Broome, their best scorer, back. But Auburn, they really didn't miss that much of a beat without him, man. I mean, they won all their games without him. So, I mean, I think this is still just going to be a straight handicap in this one as opposed to a gay handicap. Auburn's coming off that highly publicized game against Tennessee, man. They beat Tennessee, a ranking matchup between two teams ranked in the top 10, I should say. A big rankings matchup there. Auburn actually coming off 3 straight wins over ranked teams. Mississippi State in the first game that Broome was out, where I played Auburn in that game. Then I actually played against them in the Georgia game, which I thought was a sandwich spot. Georgia covered for me. And it was that second game without Broome. Then Broome came back, so it was the reverse injured player theory. So I actually, I forget what my lean was on this. I might have actually had the wrong lean on that one. I might have actually leaned to Auburn in that game, and they did not cover in the game, so I didn't have the right read on that one, but I didn't play that game. The last couple of Auburn games I actually played, I got right. So I'm coming in, I'm going to play LSU here, man. Auburn's coming off that grueling defensive game, physical game, huge win over Tennessee. I mean, that's pretty much their biggest win of the season in conference play at the very least. Not bigger than Houston and Iowa State, I guess, but still, that was a huge conference win against Tennessee. Big win. Now they have to go out on the road to face LSU, and Auburn hasn't quite been as good on the road, man. I mean, on the road, they only beat Texas by 5, only beat South Carolina by 3. That was the game where Broome got hurt, but still, I mean, I don't think they were going to cover that number in that game anyway. And then they only beat Georgia by 2, and they lost to Duke. I mean, I'm not going to blame them for losing to Duke on the road, but Auburn has not won by anything close to this margin on the road yet. And yes, I know LSU is probably the worst team that they played on the road so far. Probably worse than South Carolina, maybe, although I don't know. South Carolina does like to slow the game down. LSU does not like to do that, but still, Auburn, not a great track record on the road. I think this is a sandwich spot, as they do also have a ranked Ole Miss team up next, coming up that huge win, really 3 big wins in a row. I think it is a bad spot for them. I'm going to take LSU, like I said. LSU has not really been playing that well. They're coming off a tough game against Alabama, but they were pretty much out of that game. It wasn't like a game where they were really in the game, although they did compete in the game. So they are coming off 2 road games where they face pretty good teams, but still, this is the number 1 team coming to their place, man. I don't think LSU is going to be in a hangover spot or anything like that with Auburn coming into their place. And LSU's been a little bit better at home in conference play. Their 1 conference win was at home against Arkansas, although Arkansas hasn't been playing well. And they did lose at home to Vandy by 8, but Vandy's been playing pretty well. So I'm not really going to knock them for that. They did have a good out-of-conference record, but they faced a lot of weak out-of-conference teams, so a very weak out-of-conference schedule. But still, I think this is a spot where LSU is actually going to show up and put in an effort in this game with number 1 coming into their place. I mean, number one ranked team in the country always is going to have, a target on their back. And yes, Auburn's legitimately the number 1. Ken Bum has them number 1 as well. They play a bit of a mid-tempo style game. Ken Bum does have them 49th in luck, so he does have them overperforming a bit. He does have them number 1 in strength of schedule and in offense. But even so, and very good defensively, yeah, we know Auburn's a very good team. LSU down at 66th, but I do think they have the ability to be competitive. Their defense is not that bad, at 51st in the country. They play a little bit faster than Auburn likes to, so I don't know if they're going to try to speed Auburn up. LSU does, they are the team that's kind of known for trying to play a little bit faster, so maybe they will try to do that. Even though they're fast-paced, but they play good defense. That's kind of a weird mix there. Ken Bum has LSU at 253rd in luck, so he has them actually being a little bit undervalued right now, according to his luck index, and they have faced the 72nd most difficult schedule, so they've been battle-tested a little bit, at least since conference play started. So all that being considered, I like LSU in this one. I think Ken Bum has the line right around 12 or 13 as well. Give me LSU plus the points in that game. Next up is another play for me, and this is going to be a letdown spot. that I'm going to play. I'm going to take the points with West Virginia, even though I keep harping on West Virginia's overrated. Ken Pom has them high in the luck index. Yes, I know. But sometimes there's a spot where you will want to play on that team. I thought West Virginia was a decent spot to play them in that game against Iowa State. Didn't play that game, but I am going to play this game on West Virginia plus the 9 at home against Houston. I know how good Houston is. Houston's down from 9 to 8 with juice now. 71% of tickets, 87% of the cash on West Virginia. So I don't know that the public is actually going to want to come in on West Virginia here, even though West Virginia's been ranked and they just fell out of the rankings finally. But when you have a number 6 team like Houston and they just beat Kansas, you got to think the public sentiment is going to be siding with Houston, kind of against what we see here in that percentage. We do see more of the money coming in on the West Virginia side, and that I think that's what's driven the line down, and I agree with it. I mean, Houston's coming off, there's nothing else to say about this. Houston, they're coming off their legitimizer game. I mean, they had a couple other big opponents this year, but they lost to Auburn close and Alabama close. Didn't play another very good team until they faced Kansas, and the question was kind of like, who is this Houston team? Like, are they actually still a very good team? Well, I think they proved that, yes, they are still a very good team. They went into Allen Fieldhouse, beat Kansas, and yes, I know people are actually probably going to make fun of Houston a little bit because they probably should have lost the game once it got down into overtime, and Kansas blew that 6-point lead in the final 30 seconds on craziness where they missed 2 free throws. Houston hit a 3. Kansas threw away the inbound pass. Houston hit another 3, and then Houston won in overtime. But still, I think the public is still going to like Houston in a spot like this. I mean, they just beat Kansas, man, and that was a huge win. They looked impressive. They did it in a high-scoring game, and by the way, Houston does not tend to play high-scoring games, and that game got a little bit higher scoring than it should have been because it did get into overtime, double overtime. So not only is Houston coming off a massive win, but they're coming off a game where they scored more than they normally would because it went into double overtime, and it went into double overtime, so it was extra effort. Huge game for Houston, and now they have a second straight road game where they have to go to Morgantown and face a West Virginia team they already beat at home by double digits, so they probably won't be paying that much attention to West Virginia. West Virginia's kind of fallen off recently, too. They haven't been playing as well, and Houston has Texas Tech up next, which is going to be a big battle of ranked Texas teams, man. That's going to be a big game. So I think this is also a sandwich spot for Houston. So the spot lines up very nicely to grab the points with West Virginia. West Virginia's coming off a couple of disgusting losses. I played against them in this Arizona State game because they were coming off beating Iowa State, man. That was a huge win for West Virginia. They stormed the court. They were in a letdown spot after that. Arizona State caught them in the letdown spot. I liked Arizona State a lot in that game. I got the win in that one. Then West Virginia, I think they may have been a little bit hungover, and they went on the road to face Kansas State. I didn't think that was a great spot either. As I mentioned, I kind of liked Kansas State in that game. West Virginia also may have been looking ahead to this game against Houston, which is also going to be a little bit of revenge. But still, this is Houston coming into their house. It's a top team coming into West Virginia's house. And West Virginia, one thing you could say about them is they have stepped up big time when they face highly ranked teams. They beat Gonzaga, and I think Gonzaga is actually flying a little bit under the radar right now. They beat Arizona, who we know is actually a pretty good team right now. They beat Kansas on the road. They did lose to Arizona in the Arizona revenge spot, though, and they did lose to Houston the first time, but then they beat Iowa State. So West Virginia, even though, yes, I think they've been a bit overrated, they have been competitive when they've had these big step-up games, and I do think they're going to be competitive in this game, and it is a bad spot for Houston. West Virginia, last home game they had was that ugly game against Arizona State, so coming back home, I think they're going to be pretty motivated for all these different reasons, and especially also to redeem themselves from their previous home game being an ugly game. When you have a team that's returning back home and their last home game was a really ugly performance, they tend to bounce back from that. So all those reasons, I like West Virginia here. And the other good thing about this is that Houston plays one of the slowest paces in the country, and they're number 1 in defense. So you know Houston's game. Houston likes to grind you down. They like to play a lot of close defensive games. So that's not very conducive to laying a bunch of points on the road. Houston, not necessarily a team that should be laying that many points on the road. So I like that too, even though, yes, Ken Pom does have them way low in luck index. Houston is actually better than we even think they are right now. He's got them at number 2 in the country. I mean, yeah, Houston is still one of the best teams in the country, but this spot is just not a spot where I like them. I think Ken Pom does have them winning this game by about 8 or 9. So the line looks decent for it. In West Virginia, they also play an extremely slow tempo, and they play really good defense. They're 19th in the country in defense. Yeah, they're 48th ranked in KenPom's rankings. It's because their offense has really struggled. But when you're going to get a game that is probably going to be a defensive battle like this between two very good defenses and two very slow-paced teams, I think that is definitely conducive to looking towards the home team getting a bunch of points as an underdog. All those points are worth a bit more, man, when you have a game that looks like it sets up like this. And this is a low total, although it's up from 120.5 to 123.5. Still a very low total here. So it's expected to be a low-scoring defensive game. Yes, I know West Virginia doesn't win the luck index here, as they're 87th in luck. I know they've been overperforming. Houston's actually been underperforming, but everything else about this game puts me on West Virginia. And even the luck index part of it, I don't think it's not like you're getting value on the Houston side here. I mean, you're laying 9 points on the road here. I don't think there's any value to be had on the Houston side, especially in a spot like this. I think the value is indeed on the West Virginia side. I'll grab the points. Give me the points with West Virginia. Nate, what's up, man? Roselli was not me either. I like all these Italian names, though. Thank you, Serve5. Thank you, sir. I try, at least. I think I'm a bit too autistic, and I start to ramble and stuff, but hopefully you get something out of it. I've been doing well recently. I've been hot, man. After I had a bad year last year, I'm off to a nice start this year. After I was in the hole this year at one point, too, and things are not looking good, but now I got a nice padding here, and I want to keep it up. I want to keep winning. Wisconsin is at Maryland. This is a nice Big Ten matchup here. This is going to be a good game. I'm not going to play this game, but it is one of those games where Wisconsin is ranked 17th in the country. Maryland is unranked, and I've been harping on how Maryland should be ranked, and Maryland is very undervalued right now, in my opinion, flying under the radar. So this is one of those situations where you have an unranked home favorite against a ranked road underdog. And I say that tends to be a bit of a moneymaker because it's a very misleading looking spread, because the public is going to look at this and think, how am I getting points with a ranked Wisconsin team against an unranked Maryland team? Well, it's because the odds makers are telling you the odds makers are actually telling you they're the better team, and I actually would not go that far, but I do think these teams are very close in power ratings. Maryland's up from 3 to now 4.5, so if you like Maryland, I do think the value is kind of gone as far as the number is concerned. I do like the Maryland side in this one as well, because I do think it is a misleading spread. It looks way too easy to take Wisconsin, but at 4.5, bordering on 5, I am not going to quite get there with that one. I do think 3 is about more of a fair line on Maryland. Maryland up from 3 to 4.5 with juice, 55% of tickets, 69% of the cash. So it does look like the money has come in on the Maryland side. The professionals see that unranked favorite, man, and they like to come in on that side. I don't see much of a situational angle here. I mean, Wisconsin's coming up absolutely drilling Nebraska, but I don't think they're going to be unfocused going to Maryland. But it is also a weird spot where they have to go to the East Coast, which I don't know. This might be their first trip, actually, to the East Coast this year. They've been to the Pacific Coast. They haven't been to the East Coast, so maybe not the easiest spot. Having to go to the East Coast there for Wisconsin. Maryland, like I said, is a very, very good team, kind of flying under the radar right now. And they just had a second straight road game where they almost lost and probably should have at Indiana. And I played on both of these Maryland games. I had Maryland against Illinois. I thought Illinois was in a bad spot coming off that battle against Michigan State. I nailed Maryland. They had a great late part of that game and blew out Illinois. And then after that, I thought Maryland was just feeling way too high on themselves. So I played Indiana in the next game. Indiana did cover for me, although they did not win the game outright. But I nailed both of these Maryland games. Now Maryland's coming back home, and they're coming off that scare against Indiana where they didn't play well. So I do think this is going to be a spot where they will show up and play a little bit better here. And in their last home game, they didn't really play that well against Nebraska, not winning by that much. So I do think this is going to be a return to form type of spot for Maryland here. So I do like how it sets up for Maryland. I do like how the line is indicating to you that Maryland is undervalued right now. The odds makers are kind of telling you, hey, Maryland is actually pretty good, but KenPom does still actually have Wisconsin slightly higher ranked than Maryland. So he has this line right around 3. So 4.5, I think, is a bit pushing it, even though I do still lean to that side. But kind of like with that UCLA one, which Wisconsin did wind up covering and losing that game only by 2 points, covering at UCLA. This kind of looks like that game where UCLA I thought was probably the right side, laying points as an unranked home favorite, but I didn't want to do it just because it didn't look like there was much value in the line, and that's kind of how I feel about this game. Maryland will try to speed Wisconsin up, probably, even though Wisconsin has played a little bit faster than we're used to seeing them play. Maryland plays super fast, and Maryland is a little bit, they're pretty low in the luck index. Both these teams are, as far as KenPom is concerned, but Maryland a little bit more so. And he does have Wisconsin as the better offense, but Maryland as the better defense out of the two. So you may get better defense and Maryland trying to speed the game up, which is kind of interesting. Rambling is good. I almost thought that said Grambling is good, like Grambling State's basketball team. Okay, well, thank you, sir. Rambling is what I do. So, all right. Actually, I think I skipped 3 of these games, man. I think I forgot to handicap Charlotte Temple. Oh, man, do I have to do this on the fly real quick? I'm probably not going to play any of these games. Charlotte did just beat South Florida, though. That is a big win for them. They came off a tough game against Memphis, too. So, in Temple, I think they lost their last game to an inferior team. Yeah, they lost bad to UTSA, and they're returning back home here. So, quick read on that one is to lean to the Temple side. I'm just kind of handicapping on the fly here. They are down from 9 to 8.5, though, with 67% of tickets, 64% of the cash. So the market looks like it's against it, but that's the way that I would lean in that one based on the situation. As a quick read, Virginia has just really been awful this year, man. Virginia, they have really fallen off. They lost Tony Bennett, their coach. I don't even know what happened to that guy. I don't know what the deal was there. Both of these teams have fallen off horribly, Virginia and Maryland. So this is the battle of, like, 2 teams that have just completely fallen off this year, man. So I don't know what to think about that Virginia-Maryland game at all. Really no read in this one at all. Virginia-Miami, excuse me. Miami's sitting at a 1-point favorite. 50% of the tickets on them, 57% of the cash on Virginia. Virginia does have the better-looking record, so the fact that Miami is favored at home and they look like they have a little bit of the money would have me leaning to the Miami side. As ugly as that seems, Virginia is really not a good team either. And I forgot to handicap Virginia Tech. I'm overlooking the ACC, man. The ACC is a bad conference, so what can you do? Virginia Tech at Florida State. What do we got going on in this one? Virginia Tech just lost by double digits to Clemson. Clemson's not bad. Florida State just had to go to the Pacific Coast. Now they're coming back from that. I don't have much of a read on this one at all. Let me see what the market looks like here with Florida State. Florida State's up from 10.5 to 11. That looks like a pretty high line in a game that you might think might be a little bit competitive, but oddsmakers telling you Florida State's significantly better than Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, another down team this year. The ACC, just awful this year, man. So I would probably agree with what the market is kind of signaling and laying the points with Florida State. But again, those 3 games are just very, very slight reads there. I actually kind of like the Temple situation more than I like the situations in the other 2 games, but not going to play any of that crap. Duquesne is at St. Joe's. This is going to be one of the more interesting A10 matchups here. Duquesne just lost a couple games in a row. They lost to Dayton, which broke their win streak. Dayton, a good team, and that might have hung them over into the next game where they also lost to Fordham. That's a pretty ugly loss, so I kind of think Duquesne could be in a little bit of a bounce-back spot here. But they did also beat St. Joe's at home earlier this year, so is it going to be revenge for St. Joe's? Maybe. And St. Joe's, they're coming off a tough loss to Dayton, though, again, and that might be, again, the type of game, like I just said, with Duquesne, where that game might actually hang them over into this game against Duquesne. So I do think Duquesne might be the way to lean as far as the situation is concerned there. And I know you're getting a lot of points with Duquesne here. St. Joe's sitting at a 9-point favorite. So that line almost actually kind of looks misleading, where the odds makers are telling you that St. Joe's is that much better than Duquesne, even though the record isn't that much better. And I actually think Duquesne is a little bit undervalued for the most part. Like in general, I think Duquesne's been undervalued this year. So I would probably take the points with Duquesne if I was going to play that game, but that is a tough read, man. Next up, we got another play of mine, and that is Indiana State minus 4.5. No more Kareem Abdul-Jabbar here. He's on St. Louis, and St. Louis had a weird brawl in the stands between some of their fans and some of the VCU fans last night with a big win for St. Louis over VCU last night as a home underdog. But this is a game where I'm going to fade Missouri State, man. Missouri State they've just been awful in the Missouri Valley, and I know it might almost look too easy to lay the points here with Indiana State, but Indiana State also hasn't been good, and their record is only a couple games better. Missouri State, yes, I know they also lost at home to Indiana State, so it is an in-season kind of road revenge angle for taking the points with Missouri State, but I still don't even buy it. Missouri State was laying 4.5 in this game, and now I know Indiana State's laying 4.5, but Missouri State, back then, we thought they were not as bad as they actually are. They are much worse than we thought they are. They've lost every game in conference play so far, but the reason I'm going to fade them here is what did they just do? They just took Drake into overtime at home, man. This was Missouri State's, big game of the year. 8.5-point underdogs at home against the best team in the conference, Drake, even though I think Bradley is actually ahead of them in conference standing right now. But Drake is the best team power ratings-wise in this conference. And Missouri State, the worst team in the conference, took Drake completely to the limit and wound up finally falling apart in overtime and losing the game. How do you get back up off the mat after that, man? You put in not only a huge effort, but an overtime effort, and you almost beat the best team in the conference. I think this is real bad for Missouri State coming off of that game, man. Now they're coming off that and having to play a team. I know it's a team that beat them, but still having to go out on the road. They have not been great on the road either. I mean, they haven't been great in general. Indiana State, on the other hand, I think they're in a better spot here. Indiana State, yes, even though I know they did already beat this Missouri State team earlier in the season, yes, that's one of their only couple of conference wins, but I think they're going to show up. I think they're going to want a conference win, man, because they're on a bad loss streak as well. They have lost a bunch of games in a row, 6 games in a row, and their last home game, they lost by almost 20 points to Northern Iowa. Northern Iowa is a decent team, one of the better teams in this conference. That's not that bad of a loss for them, but I think Indiana State, they finally get a winnable game. I expect them to show up, even though, yes, they did already beat this team on the road, but when you're losing every game like this, you're not going to overlook an opponent that you beat earlier in the season, man. You're going to want to win. So I think that is the case, whereas Missouri State's coming off that game that was their biggest effort of the year, basically. I don't like it at all for Missouri State, and Missouri State is a really slow-paced team. Missouri State is 343rd in the country in tempo, according to KenPom. Indiana State, on the other hand, is 4th in tempo in the country. So this is a drastic pacing collision, and usually the better team, especially if they're at home, usually the home team can win out in the pacing battle, especially if they're the better team. And Indiana State is definitely the better team here. They're certainly the better offensive team. Missouri State is terrible offensively, and I think both teams are pretty bad defensively, but Indiana State's going to try to run up and down the court. KenPom does have both these teams as being unlucky so far this year, but still, this is all about it being a hangover spot for Missouri State, and I expect Indiana State to try to run up and down the court and try to tire this Missouri State team out, who already might be tired after taking Drake to the limit. Again, give me Indiana State here. Missouri State doesn't play anywhere near the style that Indiana State is going to want to play at home. This line's just sitting at 4.5. I see no market indicators yet, but I think it's a hangover spot. I will lay the points with Indiana State in that one. Will, thank you, sir. All right. Let's keep going here, man. Next up, we're going to the Patriot League, and I got to play in the fucking Patriot League, man. This bad conference. I'm going to play Lafayette plus 1.5 in this game. This one, the line has actually moved against it with American up from Pick'em to 1.5. I know I'm being anti-American here. I apologize. I'm a traitor. The line has moved up on American, but I don't know what really caused this move, because I think the only play here is to fade American in this spot. American is coming off a game where they just beat Colgate, man. Colgate has been the best team in the Patriot Conference for years in a row now. Colgate is always the team that wins this conference, and American this year seems to be pretty competitive and competing with Colgate this year. And American just beat Colgate. That is a huge win for them, man, to beat the team that has dominated this conference for so long on your own floor. You beat Colgate, huge win. And now they have to go out on the road to face Lafayette. And on the road, they haven't been as good. They're 2-2 in conference. They had a real ugly loss on the road at Navy, lost at BU. And yeah, they beat Loyola Maryland and Holy Cross on the road, but those teams are awful. Even though, yes, I know Lafayette is pretty bad too. So Lafayette is in the mix there as far as how bad those teams are. But I think American is going to be a letdown spot of that big win over Colgate. And up next, They got Army in a couple of days, and Army is the team that's right behind Colgate. So they're facing the other top 2 teams in the conference surrounding this game. That's a sandwich spot. They got to go to Lafayette here in between the two, and I think they may not pay attention to this Lafayette team that hasn't been playing well. Lafayette's coming off an absolutely embarrassing loss on the road to Lehigh, where they lost by almost 40 points, 86-47 to Lehigh, who's the team in the bottom spot in the standings. That is a completely embarrassing loss for Lafayette. I don't know how that happened, man. Terrible, terrible loss for them. It was a second straight road game, and they were coming off a blowout win the game before that against Loyola, Maryland. Yeah, Lafayette, I think they're going to be in a bounce-back mode after that. I mean, that was such an embarrassing loss. They're coming back home after 2 road games. In their last home game, they got crushed by Colgate. So the public might come in if they see this game, which they probably won't. But if they see it, they're going to be like, oh, you're giving me a line that's basically just pick the winner. And you got this Lafayette team that got annihilated by Colgate, and American just beat Colgate. Like, how could you not play American in this game, right? Well, I, again, look the other way here in this game. Lafayette, I mean, they've played some of the better teams in the conference, really. I mean, they've lost to Bucknell on the road, Navy by 1 on the road, and both those games were close games. I mean, I'm not going to blame them really for those losses. They lost to Colgate, like I said, Army by 2 on the road, another competitive game for Lafayette there. So their schedule hasn't really been that easy. Their only really bad loss is this one to Lehigh, and that is what I think they're going to bounce back from here. So give me Lafayette plus the 1.5 in this one. And yes, I know Lafayette is the worst team, but it's not by that much. They're pretty unlucky, according to KenPom, 318th in luck. Even though I know you're dealing with 2 really bad teams in this game. Lafayette being the worst of the 2, of course. But American also is very lucky, though, in the KenPom rankings. He has them 29th in luck versus he has Lafayette as one of the most unlucky teams in the entire nation. He has American only winning this game, I believe, by 1. So that's right in line with it as well. And he does have Lafayette as the better defense out of the 2. Not the better offense. Their offense sucks. But he does have them as the better defense. And he has them similar pacing-wise. American plays really, really slow. Lafayette plays a little bit less slow. So maybe Lafayette will try to speed them up a little bit in this game as well. But I like the spot for Lafayette in that one. Let's move on. We do have North Alabama at Queens. I forget who's our guy who's the Queens fan. Matthew O'Toole, is that his name? Timmy O'Toole fell down the well. He's not in the chat right now, but he's the Queens dude. Queens has not been that good recently, and they got North Alabama coming to their place, and North Alabama is actually laying points on the road to them. So the odds makers are again telling you Queens probably not as good as that hot start that they had. North Alabama up from 2.5 to 2.5 with juice, laying the points on the road. Both teams are probably going to show up focused in that game. So I kind of do lean to the North Alabama side just because they are the better team there. In the SoCon here, you got Chattanooga coming off a big win over East Tennessee after they actually beat Furman on the road, played Samford really close, and then they beat East Tennessee on the road. So they played all 3 of the best teams surrounding them in the conference all in a row, and now they go on the road for a second straight road game to face Western Carolina. Doesn't look like a great spot for Chattanooga, so I would lean to the Western Carolina side in this one, but Western Carolina is terrible, but they did finally get a win to break this loss streak. They beat Citadel. I mean, Citadel is awful. Nancy Mace's alma mater, man, she's bragging about being the first woman to graduate from there, whatever. Some DEI bullshit. Stop being an egalitarian, Miss Mace, because I think you're hot and I like a lot of the things that you say, but I don't like all this egalitarian DEI shit. Chattanooga up from 10.5 to 11. So the line's gone up on them a little bit. Western Carolina is a really bad team, but it is a bad spot for Chattanooga, so I'll throw that out there. East Tennessee State's facing UNC Greensboro, which is going to be a big matchup in that same conference, the SoCon. That's probably going to be a good game there. Greensboro's up from 2 to 2.5. Oddsmakers not giving them full home court here. So Oddsmakers telling you East Tennessee is a slightly better team, but the line has moved up a little bit on Greensboro, so it looks like some money has come in on the Greensboro side there. All right, let's keep going. Kansas State, I almost wanted to fade them. I do lean against them here. They just had a big win over West Virginia, who was ranked. They knocked West Virginia out of the rankings. I said I thought West Virginia might be in a little bit of a hangover spot off of that loss in the letdown spot to Arizona State. So Kansas State's coming off that game. They're staying at home, and they got Iowa State up next in a couple of days, which is a big game. Iowa State, very good team. They did, however, lose by double digits to Oklahoma State the first time they played them. So that's the one thing that kind of has me having a little bit of hesitation here, where they probably remember Oklahoma State totally embarrassed them at Oklahoma State. So Kansas State might show up just for that reason. But other than that, it does look like it is kind of a sandwich spot for Kansas State. Kansas State up from 7 to 7.5, though, with the money coming in on their side. It looks like 53% of the cash on them, 50% of the tickets evenly split. So I don't want to come in and try to fade Kansas State, but it does look like not a very good spot for them. Oklahoma State's coming off losing by 10 to Texas Tech, and they are facing a second straight road game. So I don't know. I don't think they're really going to overlook Kansas State, though, even though they did beat them before. This Oklahoma State team just trying to get wins here at this point. But then again, Kansas State actually is behind them in the rankings, even though they are the way better team. So for that reason, the line almost looks a little bit misleading. Kansas State might show up for that reason because they know they're behind Oklahoma State in the rankings here. But Kansas State is indeed the better team. But it looks like a weird line, right? With Kansas State having the worst record, but they're laying 7.5. So the line does look a little bit misleading there. Next up will be another play for me, and I'm going to lay the points. I know I can't help myself with Creighton -6. I think this is a bad spot for Xavier, and I'm going to fade their ass. We're in the 8 p.m. slate, at least. I'm trying to get this video done here, man. Xavier, they're coming off a few huge wins in a row. They won on the road against Marquette. Huge upset win. Second straight road game. I faded them in this game, and Xavier took St. John's into overtime, and lucky for me, St. John's still actually wound up covering in overtime, but Xavier played them basically to the wire in that game, again as a road underdog. Huge games. Then after that, they also didn't suffer from like tiredness or anything like that, and he beat UConn in revenge. They beat the returning champs, UConn. Now after that string of a few games, they have to go out on the road to Omaha, Nebraska, and face Creighton. It does not look like the greatest spot for Xavier in this one, man. They have not been out that far west this year, except for this game against TCU, which, by the way, they lost. Xavier's not been very good on the road, losing at TCU, losing at Cincinnati, losing at UConn. They did play well on the road. I mean, they beat DePaul. DePaul sucks. They lost on the road to Georgetown as well, so they were 0-4 on the road before beating Marquette, big road win, and then they lost at St. John's. So they are only 2-5 on the road, which is not great. Creighton, fairly formidable at home when they catch these teams at home. Creighton has really started turning it around. I think they got one of their injured players back. Creighton has been playing really well as of late, and they're just on a roll right now, man. They're coming off a couple of easy wins, so I don't think they're going to be feeling like too high on themselves or anything like that. They know Xavier is good, so I think they are going to be focused. Xavier is like right behind them in the standings now, so I expect Creighton will show up. I think both teams will show up for this game, but I do think it's going to be a very tired spot for Xavier coming off 3 huge games like that, whereas Creighton has had it much easier over the last couple of games. So I think Creighton's staying at home with no travel too. So I like Creighton in this game, and that is what I'm going to do. The line's just sitting at 6. I don't see any market movement yet on this, but I will lay the points with Creighton in this one. And as far as Xavier is concerned, they play like a mid-tempo game. Yes, Ken Bum has them being a little bit unlucky. I'm aware of all that, but he does have Creighton as the better team, somewhat. He does have Creighton as the better defense. He has them similar, or actually he has Creighton better both sides of the ball. Never mind. He has Creighton better on both offense and defense. He does have both teams being like mid-tempo pace teams, so there's not really going to be a pacing collision. And he does have Creighton being luckier, so that does worry me slightly, but I think the spot is still right to play Creighton in the spot, even though he does have Xavier being just undervalued in general. But in this spot, I don't think they are. He's got Creighton is having faced a more difficult schedule, 18th in the country. Both teams have faced difficult schedules. They're both battle-tested. Creighton, again, they're pretty formidable at home, man. And Ken Pom, I think, has this line right like around where the line is at like 6. So I will lay the 6 with Creighton in that one. Although maybe it's the weakest. Yeah, this is a college basketball bonanza for sure. Again, I told you I can't help myself. I see a spot and I'm like, yeah, I kind of like that. I want to do it. All right. Alabama, Mississippi State is maybe the biggest game based on rankings, number 4 and number 14. This is going to be a big one, and I don't have a play in this game. Alabama's coming off beating LSU and not really beating them that impressively, and I know I am playing LSU today, even though LSU kind of hung around late in that game, but I think Alabama just kind of took their foot off the gas in that game. Now Alabama's going out on the road, I know, which is a tough environment to have to go to Mississippi State, but I do think Alabama's in a spot where they should be focused for this game. Both teams should be. I mean, this is a big game. It's one of the big games of the night. It's on SEC Network, but it might also be on ESPN. I'm not sure. Mississippi State, on the other hand, they're coming off 2 road games. They lost to Tennessee, but they barely beat South Carolina. So actually, both teams are kind of coming off wins that weren't really that impressive. So both teams are in pretty good spots to show up focused in this game. So I think this is going to be a good game. And I think the clincher here is what the market looks like in this game. Mississippi State has flipped from a 1.5-point dog to a 1-point favorite with juice. So some actual money is coming in on Mississippi State. 64% of tickets, 76% of the cash on them. And when you see money coming in on the lesser ranked team and they are actually a favorite and they flip to the favorite, that is something that I do pay attention to. So it looks like the money is coming in on that side. So I would lean to that side slightly. I agree with the Mississippi State side slightly in that one. And Alabama, I mean, they play really fast. Mississippi State is the better of the 2 defensive teams. They can definitely compete offensively too. Both teams aren't that bad defensively, but Mississippi State's a little bit better defensively. And I think Mississippi State's going to try to slow Alabama down. Alabama's number 1 in tempo, so they really try to run it, whereas Mississippi State plays on the in the slower half of tempo. So Mississippi State, if they're able to slow this game down a bit, they may be able to get Alabama out of their element a little bit and be able to win this game. Next up is another play for me. The bonanza continues. Ole Miss -6 is another play for me. I know they are the ranked team and Texas is not, but I just think Texas is in a fade spot after what they just did. They just had a couple of huge wins. They beat Missouri. I was on Texas in that game against Missouri. I think I was, right? On that game against Missouri. I think Missouri had just upset Florida or something. Or no, they just upset Florida and beaten Arkansas and didn't suffer the letdown. So I played Texas in that game. They won. Big win over a ranked Missouri team, but nothing is bigger than this revenge win for Texas against Texas A&M. Huge Texas battle. Texas had lost by 20 the first time they played Texas A&M. This game, they were losing by 21 or 22 points or something in the second half, and Texas came all the way back and won the game dramatically by 1 point at the end. That was a huge comeback win for Texas. Look at that. They were completely out of the game. They were getting wrecked in this game. They were dead, and they came all the way back and won the game. I think that's going to put them in a letdown spot, and they have to go on the road to Ole Miss. Texas has not been as good on the road, man. They have struggled on the road. Winning early in the season at NC State, but NC State's not good, and they barely beat them. They lost by 20, as I said, at Texas A&M. Barely won at Oklahoma, which I don't know what the deal was with Oklahoma in that game. I thought it was a bad spot for Texas there. And then they lost to Florida on the road as well. They haven't even played that many road games yet, and they have not been very impressive on the road. Coming off that big win, yeah, I like Ole Miss in this spot. Ole Miss coming off a couple of losses, man. This Ole Miss team, they're going to want to redeem themselves, man. They played 3 of their last 4 games on the road. They haven't won a game since they beat Alabama, which was a huge win. So I think that put them in a bit of a letdown spot. I played Mississippi State in this game, but Mississippi State actually won and didn't cover in the game. But still, that was a big game as well. Ole Miss barely lost the game. Coming off of those 2 huge games, they then had to face Texas A&M, and Texas A&M got them and beat them. So again, the public might come in and look at this and think, well, wait a minute. Ole Miss just lost to Texas A&M and Missouri. Texas just beat both of those teams, and you're giving me 6 points with Texas? It almost looks too easy to take the points with Texas, but I don't think so, man. It doesn't work that way. And Ole Miss, they lost their last game at home, and they lost their last game on the road. They've lost 3 in a row. This is a spot where I expect them to show up focused, man. To try to bounce back, even though, yeah, I know they have Auburn up next, but when you're losing, you can't really afford to overlook teams like this, and they know what Texas just did. So I like Ole Miss for those reasons, and as Ken Baum will tell you, Ole Miss is the better team, and that's what the odds makers are telling you too. He's got Ole Miss 10th in the country in defense with this Chris Beard defense really shaping into form here. He has them good on offense, too. He has them better on offense and defense than Texas. Better on both sides of the ball, but significantly better defensively. He's got Ole Miss at 161st in tempo, so they play mid-tempo. Whereas Texas, they play a little bit slower, so Ole Miss might try to speed them up a little bit and try to score on them a little bit. Does have Texas 199th as far as luck is concerned, and 62nd in strength of schedule, where he's got Ole Miss 292nd in luck. So he actually has Ole Miss. Ken Baum has them as undervalued right now as far as the luck index. He's saying they're very unlucky right now, that they're better than they actually look like they are. And he does have them as facing a more difficult schedule than Texas, too, 36th in the country. So for all those reasons, I'm going to be on Ole Miss in this game. They're up from 6-6 with juice. 75% of tickets, 95% of the cash coming in on them. So the money does look like it is coming in on Ole Miss. I agree with it. I am on it. And then what else we got? We got Rutgers and Northwestern. I mean, this game, Northwestern is going to try to play defense and slow Rutgers down. Northwestern is the better of these two teams. Rutgers coming off a tough game against Michigan State, where they played it at Madison Square Garden. Rutgers covered for me barely in that game on the plus 7.5. They barely were able to get that. That was a tough game for Rutgers. Now they have to go out on the road to Northwestern, and Northwestern's coming off a loss to Illinois, where Illinois got their revenge on them. Yes, that was a big game for Northwestern, but still, I think Northwestern may be kind of in bounce-back mode after that, and Northwestern is the better of these two teams. They play better defense, and they're going to try to slow Rutgers down. Rutgers tries to play a little bit faster, so I kind of like Northwestern in this one, but Northwestern's down from 7 to 6.5 with juice. 62% of tickets on them, but 56% of the cash on Rutgers. So it looks like the money is actually coming in on Rutgers, but I don't really agree with it in that one. And then we do have a nice game here between St. Mary's and Santa Clara at Santa Clara. This is going to be a good game between two really good teams in the West Coast Conference. St. Mary's still is undefeated in the conference, but they're coming off a couple of big wins over San Francisco and Washington State. Still, that was a big win. I think it was that revenge win as well? No, I guess it wasn't, but they went out on the road, beat Washington State barely, and now they got Santa Clara, second straight road game, and they have Gonzaga up next, so they may overlook Santa Clara a little bit here because Gonzaga just has so much weight behind their name. I would lean to the Santa Clara side in this one slightly. Santa Clara's coming off that loss to Oregon State, where I said I was on Oregon State in that game because Santa Clara had beaten Gonzaga and Washington State and housed Washington State after that. So they were in a letdown spot. They lost to Oregon State, and they'd beaten Oregon State already once. I thought it was a sandwich spot where they might be looking ahead to this game against St. Mary's too. I like Santa Clara in that game. The line is up from 2.5 to 4 on St. Mary's, but 60% of the tickets on them and 51% of the cash on Santa Clara. I do think Santa Clara can give them a very competitive game in that one, in that spot. And my final play is going to be to lay the points with Utah State minus 10 against UNLV. I like this one because this is a revenge spot, man. UNLV, they're also playing a second tough game in a row where I know they lost to Wyoming. That was a bad spot for them. I played Wyoming in that game. Wyoming almost blew the game in the end, but UNLV had beaten Utah State and San Diego State coming into that game. Two huge wins. Then they had to play Wyoming, and they had New Mexico up next. So that was a sandwich spot. UNLV got caught in the sandwich. Then they stepped it up, and they played pretty well against New Mexico and only lost that game by 2. Very big performance from UNLV again. Now they have to go out on the road into elevation into Utah State, which is not an easy thing to do, even though I know they do it every year because they're in the same conference, but still, not a very good spot for them, in my opinion. They do have Nevada up next, and Nevada is their biggest rival. I mean, that's their natural in-state rival there, so it is actually possible they might even actually overlook Utah State, as ridiculous as that sounds, because Utah State is probably the best team in the conference, and they're sitting second in the conference right now because of New Mexico. So Utah State might be angry at UNLV for 2 reasons. They might be angry at UNLV for losing to New Mexico and letting New Mexico get ahead of Utah State, but also, why is Utah State going to be really, really angry? Well, Utah State only has 1 conference loss on the season, man, and who was that loss to? Oh, yeah, it was to Utah State. So that their only conference, or to UNLV, excuse me, Utah State, yeah, they lost to themselves. Utah State's only conference loss this year so far was on the road at UNLV by 3 points. UNLV played a really good game in that one. So Utah State, I think this is the type of revenge that matters, man. When you have one loss in conference play and you are facing that team again, the only team that dealt you that loss, you're going to want to show up in that game. Utah State is coming off an easy win where they blasted Air Force on the road. Not impressive, but I think they're just going to roll into this game with some momentum. And yes, I know they have a big game against New Mexico up next, and that's between the top two teams in the conference, but I don't think they're going to overlook UNLV because UNLV is the only team in the conference that beat them. Like I said, so that's one reason that I think Utah State is going to show up in this game. Utah State's down from 10.5 to 10 with juice, which I don't love, but it looks like it was at 10 for a while, and it's headed back up a little bit, but I like Utah State for that in-season revenge angle, avenging your only conference loss. I like that, and they are just the way better team as well. I think Utah State's the better team on both sides of the ball. UNLV, by the way, plays slow, 292nd in tempo, according to Kenbaum. Does have them in 134th in luck, whereas with Utah State, yes, he does have them luckier at 42nd. He does have them as facing, I think, the slightly more difficult schedule out of the two at 100th. UNLV, where does he have UNLV? He's got them way down here. He has UNLV at worse than the 100th best team. Actually, UNLV has faced a slightly more difficult schedule at 74th, whatever. He's got Utah State up at 38th. Utah State is a significantly better team. I think he has Utah State winning this game by 10 or somewhere around this, or right where the line is. Utah State is better on both offense and defense, and the thing I like about this is Utah State plays pretty fast, 114th in tempo, so UNLV, when they played in Las Vegas, UNLV was able to slow the pace way down and stay in that game. I don't think that's going to happen in this one. This is a different venue. This is at Utah State. Utah State should be able to control the pace in this one, whereas UNLV controlled it in the first game. Utah State should be able to speed this game up and be able to throw UNLV out of their element. So give me Utah State in that one. Let's move over to NHL. We got a small NHL card here. Not a whole lot going on here. I don't have any plays here. I'll talk about a couple of the games here. Minnesota and Toronto is a big game. The odds makers are telling you Toronto is a significantly better team as they are up from minus 155 to minus 164, 78% of tickets, 99% of the cash. So the money looks like it's coming in on Toronto, and the public might have a tendency to look at this and think these teams have similar records. This is going to be a very competitive matchup. But I've been saying Minnesota's a little bit overrated, and I think it might come into play here. So I would lean to the Toronto side here. There's not much of a situation here. It's a second straight road game for Minnesota, which is whatever. Although Toronto did just lose to Ottawa, so they're kind of in like a bounce back spot, I guess I would say. Both teams have a few days off coming into this game as well. And the few days off might actually help Toronto more because they're on a loss streak. So having those days off might actually help Toronto break that loss streak a little bit more, break that losing momentum. So I like Toronto there. LA Kings are at Florida. This is kind of an interesting one. The LA Kings are in the middle of a road trip, and they just lost pretty bad at Detroit in their last game, so they may be in a little bit of a bounce-back spot here. But they did just beat Florida at home a couple games before that, so Florida may be looking for a little bit of revenge here as well. So looks like both teams probably have reason to show up in this game. Florida's coming off an ugly loss to Vegas, even though Vegas is a good team, losing 4-1. But then the problem with Florida is they're returning home from a road trip, and they've been away for like a week, and they went to the Pacific Coast. So, I always say when a team returns home from a road trip, a lot of times they are not focused on that game. They have family life to get back to, and that becomes a distraction. But the fact that they did lose on that road trip to the Kings, and the Kings are a good team, and they don't have a bigger game up next against Chicago, it gives you a little bit of hesitation here where maybe Florida would still show up in this game. But there's no way I'm going to play on a team that's returning home from a road trip. Florida is up a little bit from minus 155 to minus 157. 73% of tickets, 95% of the cash. So it does look like the money is slightly coming in on that side, but I'm not going to touch it. And then we do have New Jersey playing a home-and-home here against Philadelphia. New Jersey just lost at Philadelphia, so New Jersey could be in a little bit of a quick revenge spot here. They're up from minus 185 to minus 187, 65% of tickets, 97% of the cash. So the line in all three of these games, New Jersey, Florida, and Toronto, all look very similar, where the money looks like it is coming in on that home favorite in those games, and I don't disagree with any of those. So it looks like that would be the spot. New Jersey in like the zigzag kind of quick revenge spot there. And then you have Vancouver having to go to Nashville, and they did not suffer a letdown off of beating Washington, which was a huge win for Vancouver. They went out on the road and they smacked St. Louis. So now maybe the letdown spot comes in this game against Nashville. And they do have Dallas up next in a couple of days, so they may be looking ahead to Dallas as well. So slightly into Nashville here. And as I've been saying for a while, Nashville, they're not as bad as their record indicates. I've been saying that for forever. Nashville did win a bunch of games in a row, though mostly against not great teams, although they did mix in wins against Minnesota and Vegas in there, so that's not bad. But Nashville lost their last game to Anaheim. That is an ugly loss. So they could be in a bounce-back spot because of that, but the problem is they're returning home from a road trip, and they were away for 6 days. They went to the Pacific Coast, so they're not really in the greatest spot returning home from a road trip as well, even though they are off a horrendous loss to Anaheim. So I don't know what we're going to get out of Nashville here, but I slightly lean to the Nashville side still, but in a return home spot like that, I don't quite want to do it. They're sitting at minus 145 with no movement. 92% of the cash on them, 64% of the tickets on Vancouver, so it looks like there is a ticket versus cash discrepancy here that is indicating on the Nashville side. So I agree with it slightly. Let's go to NBA before I get out of here. And first up, I'll talk about my NBA play that I have. You need a goal from Krill the Thrill. Yeah. Austin Matthews. You're playing on props, Nate, in these hockey games. Toronto with Austin Matthews and whatever. Vancouver is in turmoil. Yeah, I mean, there's some stuff going on there. I don't know exactly what's going on with them, but I know they also had that suspension because of that Edmonton fight where I think Myers, is that his name? He's back now from that suspension, but yeah. All right, my first NBA play, my only NBA play is Detroit Pistons plus the points here, +7. I'm going to grab it with Detroit. The Pacers, very public here. They're up from 5.5 to 7, 94% of tickets and only 82% of the cash. So it does look like less of the cash is on them, even though the line has gone up on them a little bit. And I'm just going to say, fine, give me the extra value here. I know the Pacers have been playing better recently, but the Pacers still aren't that great defensively, and I don't like the spot for the Pacers. They're returning home from France, man. They just went to Paris, and they played those 2 Paris games, which are highly publicized games against the Spurs. They got blown out in the first game. I predicted both of these games right, by the way, where the home team was backing San Antonio, and Indiana had to go out there and break their momentum, having to go out there. So momentum broken, they lost, but then they were able to zigzag, turn it around, and just absolutely wreck San Antonio in the second game. Now they're returning home from France, so it is a return home spot where they've been away for like a week, where they're going to have stuff to do at home. So they have to get stuff, ready back at home or whatever. So that is a distraction. And when you're coming off beating anybody like this by almost 40 points, especially if it was a game in Paris that was highly televised, you're going to be feeling pretty high on yourselves, man. And they're facing Detroit, who, by the way, they just went into Detroit and beat them by double digits in Detroit on January 16th. So they may very well overlook Detroit here. With the Hawks up next, the Hawks may be a team that grabs your attention a little bit more. So I don't like the spot at all for the Pacers for all of those reasons. Detroit, of course, has it easier as far as the travel is concerned because they're not going anywhere, although, yeah, I know they are in the middle of a road trip, but they've had breaks in the middle of this road trip here. They're trying to win the road trip, though. They've gone 2-2 on the road trip right now, and I think they are going to be motivated to try to win the road trip rather than losing it. They're coming off an ugly loss. Yes, I know it was Cleveland, which is a game you step up for, but they lost by 20 points, man. And they're only going from Cleveland to Indiana, so they're just kind of continuing on the road trip, so they shouldn't really be distracted or anything like that. The only concern would be, are they getting tired towards the end of the road trip? But I think they're going to show up for this one and try to get back to it. Indiana's travel spot and just situational spot in general, in my opinion, is way worse. Detroit, of course, is going to be looking for that quick turnaround revenge as well. Road turnaround revenge as well because they lost Indiana at home. They're going to want to try to repay the favor. Detroit has also been pretty good as an underdog recently. They've been covering a lot. They covered for me in this Houston game, won outright. That was good for me. So except for this most recent game against Cleveland, they've been playing pretty well as an underdog. So Detroit has definitely been a competitive team. Give me the Detroit Pistons plus the points there in that one. Other than that, not a whole lot going on. It's hilarious that the Raptors are up from 5.5 to 6.5, laying points on the road. When would you get the Raptors laying points on the road, man? 56% of tickets, 65% of the cash on the Raptors. That is just crazy. The Raptors are returning home from a long road trip, so they are indeed in a bad spot. So I actually agree with laying the points with Toronto in that one, but I'm not going to do it at all. But Washington, they got to be the worst team in basketball right now, man. It's just insane how bad they are. My Boston Celtics are laying 14.5 against Chicago. I don't love the spot for Boston here. Boston, yeah, they just returned home from a road trip, and they got that one game returning home from the road trip out of the way. But it was a tough game against Houston where they lost right at the end. So I don't know they're going to be in the greatest spot here against Chicago. Chicago beat them at home the last time, though. The Celtics bounced back and crushed them on the road in the next game. And I played the Celtics in that game, but now back at home, they might actually not pay attention to Chicago again, man. And the one thing Chicago does do well is defend against the three. So I do not like the Celtics as far as covering this number in this game. They're down from 15 to 14.5. 99% of tickets, 98% of the cash. Celtics are unbelievably public in this game. And I would not agree with it, of course. As I'm saying, Denver is at the Knicks. The Knicks are coming off games where they just scored over 140 points in 2 straight games against Sacramento and Memphis. They might be feeling a little bit high on themselves, scoring that many points multiple games in a row. But then again, Denver. It is Denver, though, is what I was going to say. So Denver is a big opponent, so it's possible the Knicks still show up focused for a big game against Denver. But Denver's lost 2 games in a row. They lost to Chicago, which was kind of a sandwich spot, really, between Minnesota and New York. So it does look like Denver is kind of in a bounce-back spot here, having lost a couple games in a row pretty ugly, and the Knicks might be feeling a little bit high on themselves here, even though, yeah, they're not going to overlook the Nuggets. The market read looks like it's on the Knicks, up from 3-3 with juice, but I don't really agree with it given the situation. 89% of tickets and only 61% of the cash on the Nuggets. So the Nuggets look like a public underdog with the money coming in on the Knicks side. So the market read looks strong on the Knicks, but again, I don't really agree with it. I do like the Sacramento side against Philadelphia. This was close to being a play for me, laying the points with Sacramento. That is the only way I would look in this game. Sacramento just broke their loss streak by beating Brooklyn. Brooklyn sucks, but now they have a chance to even up the road trip here. And yeah, I know they have Oklahoma City up next, but I think they're probably not going to overlook Philadelphia because they're trying to even up the road trip. And Philadelphia is in a really bad spot, in my opinion, because they just won yesterday against the LA Lakers. So they beat Cleveland and the Lakers in 2 of the last 3 games. They beat Cleveland and then they beat LeBron. They beat the 2 LeBron teams, basically. And now they're on no rest, playing on a back-to-back after that big win over LeBron. Embiid is still going to be out. He's hurt. And Paul George is hurt. He didn't play yesterday, and I don't know that he's playing today either. He's got a finger injury, and it seems like he's not going to play. And Philadelphia does have Denver and Boston up next, and those might be bigger games as well. Granted, they did lose to Sacramento on the road the last time they played them on New Year's Day, but I don't know if they're really going to remember that much. They played a lot of games since then, so I don't know. The fact that it's a back-to-back and it looks like a letdown spot, lean would be to Sacramento in this one. They're up from 7.5 to 8.5 with juice, with the Sixers being public. 90% of tickets and only 60% of the cash on them. So the Sixers look like a public home underdog in this game, where the public seems to be thinking this line is way too high. But given all the Sixers' injuries and the fact that they're on no rest and off a big win over LeBron, yeah, I think Sacramento's the right side. It's just, it is laying a little bit much on that number, and the number does seem quite high, so a little bit high. So I will stay away, but yeah. Then you got Minnesota at Phoenix. Minnesota kind of rolling right now, and I believe they're starting a road trip right now. So they might take that momentum out on the road with them to start the road trip. You are usually focused when you start a road trip. They should be more focused on this Phoenix game than they will be on this Utah game tomorrow. Phoenix also coming off a nice win, though, against the Clippers. So they're just staying at home, and they are playing pretty well right now as well. So both teams probably going to show up for this one. The Suns, look like they're pretty public, though, with the T-Wolves having flipped from a 2-point dog to a 1.5-point favorite. So the money looks like it's coming in on the T-Wolves against another public home underdog in the Suns. 91% of tickets and 89% of the cash on. So the market read looks pretty strong on the T-Wolves there. And I forget, what have the T-Wolves done against Phoenix this year? They beat them the only time they played them so far. So it actually is, I believe this is actually a revenge spot for Phoenix, though. This is playoff revenge still because Minnesota eliminated them last year, and Phoenix did not beat them the first time they played them this year. So Phoenix is still looking for that revenge at the very least. So I would not really want to fade Phoenix in this one. And then you do have Oklahoma State at Golden State. Oklahoma City at Golden State. Oklahoma City already out on the Pacific Coast, beat Portland, had a couple days off. Not a bad spot for them, really. Golden State coming off beating Utah at home to kind of redeem themselves from that ugly loss where I was on them against LA because the Lakers had just beaten the Celtics. We did not get the letdown from the Lakers now. Golden State bouncing back from that game against Utah, but Golden State did that yesterday, so they're on a back-to-back, so they have no rest, so I don't know what to do with this game. The Thunder are up from 8 to 10, 92% of tickets, 96% of the cash. Some of the money probably coming in because Golden State is very unrested here, but I'm not going to have anything to do with it. And that's going to do it, man. So my plays one more time. We have the college basketball bonanza with West Virginia +9, Indiana State -4.5, LSU +12.5, Lafayette +1.5, Creighton -6, Ole Miss -6, Utah State -10. I can't help myself at all. I'm being not very selective here. Hopefully, it's a lot of money in flux, man. So hopefully it's at least not a horrible night. Just got to avoid that after the way I've been running really nicely so far. And then I do have Detroit Pistons +7 in the NBA. That's going to do it. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Tower Gang Toad on Twitter. Patreon.com/Tower Gang. You get live pre-show, post-show. We're facing a YouTube strike again, so we're not going to be on YouTube tonight. So go find us on Rumble. If you subscribe to the Patreon, you'll be able to watch the pre-show and post-show tonight as well. Like I said, patreon.com/Tower Gang. We'll be with you tonight at 9:11 p.m. Eastern, man, with the most offensive comedy podcast out there. Thanks for hanging out, guys. Nate, Serve, Will, I always appreciate it. Peace out, guys.